Not every message from heaven is gentle. We like to imagine that when the Virgin Mary appears, she comes only with roses and soft words and comfort, and often she does. But there is one apparition, approved by the Catholic Church itself, where what three young girls were shown was so horrifying that they screamed and collapsed, where the Mother of God herself wept in front of them, and where what she warned would happen, happened exactly 12 years later, in one of the worst massacres in the history of the human race. This is not a legend. This is not one of those internet videos inventing secret prophecies and fake dates. This is a real apparition, investigated for 2 decades by the Church with all her caution and severity, and finally approved as authentic. And once you know what happened there, you will never think of a warning from heaven the same way again. I am Father Samuel, and today I want to take you to a hillside in Africa and to the most terrifying apparition the Church has ever approved, because its warning was not only for the people who died, it was for you and for our world right now. And I want to tell you 3 things along the way, so you stay with me to the end. The first, what those 3 girls were actually shown, the vision so terrible that grown men who witnessed the girls' reaction were shaken for life. The second, how 12 years later that vision came true, down to the smallest, most horrifying detail, in a way that no one could deny. And the third, the part that is really for you and the reason I ask you to stay. The warning the Virgin left, not for Rwanda, but for the whole world, and what it is asking of you and me tonight, because the same thing she came to stop is still growing in human hearts today. Stay for that, because it is the whole point. But let's begin where it began, quietly, the way heaven almost always begins, with a nobody. The year was 1981. The place was a small, poor school for girls in a remote village called Kibeho, in the hills of Rwanda, a tiny country in the heart of Africa. And on the 28th of November, a teenage student named Alphonsine, an ordinary, unremarkable girl, suddenly fell to the ground in the dining hall and began to speak with someone no one else could see. She said a beautiful lady had appeared to her, and when they asked the lady who she was, the answer came, Naina wa Jambo, in their language, the Mother of the Word, the Mother of God. And stop on that title for a moment, because it is more beautiful and more deliberate than it first sounds. She did not simply say, I am Mary. She said, I am the Mother of the Word. The Word, with a capital W, is one of the oldest and deepest names for Christ himself, the Word who was in the beginning with God, the Word through whom all things were made, the Word who became flesh. So this lady was introducing herself not by her own glory, but by her Son, defining herself entirely by her relationship to him. I am the one who carried the Word of God in my body. Even in the way she named herself, she was pointing away from herself and toward Christ, which is exactly what the true Mary always does, and what a false spirit never does. That single title, spoken to a poor girl who could not have invented such a thing, is one of the small keys that told the Church something real was happening here. Now picture the scene as it actually was. This was not a quiet chapel with candles. Alphonsine collapsed in the school dining hall, in front of the other students, in the middle of ordinary life, and began speaking to the air, answering a voice no one else could hear, her body strangely rigid, her face lit up with something the others could not see. To the teenagers around her it looked like madness or theater. And that is how almost every true apparition begins, not in a cathedral, but in the middle of the ordinary, given to someone with no power and no credibility, precisely so that no one can say it was staged for effect. Now, understand how this was received because it is important. No one believed her. They mocked her. The other students thought she was crazy or faking it, seeking attention. The school was thrown into an uproar. Some wanted her expelled. And this is one of the marks the Church always looks for in a true apparition. The visionary suffers for it, is doubted, is tested, gains nothing. Alphonsine gained only ridicule. And then something happened that changed everything. 2 of the very girls who had mocked her the loudest, who had demanded proof, began to see the lady too. First a girl named Natalie. Then, most strikingly, a girl named Marie Claire, who had been one of Alphonsine's harshest critics, who did not even believe. The lady came to the doubters. And slowly, a poor school in the hills of Africa became the site of something the whole world would eventually have to reckon with. The church, of course, did not rush. She never does with these things, and thank God for that, because for every true apparition, there are 100 false ones. The local bishop set up commissions. Doctors examined the girls. Theologians studied every word. It took 20 years of careful, skeptical investigation. And understand what the church is actually looking for in those investigations, because it tells you why approval means so much. She looks at whether the message contradicts the faith in any way. If it does, it is rejected instantly. She looks at the visionaries. Are they stable, honest, humble? Do they seek money or fame? Do they profit, or do they suffer? She looks at the fruits. Does this apparition lead people to prayer, to conversion, to the sacraments, to greater love of God, or to sensationalism and division? Most claimed apparitions fail these tests, and the church quietly says no. The vast majority of messages from heaven you see online would never survive a week of this scrutiny. Kibeho survived 20 years of it. And I want you to feel the weight of those 20 years, because they are the reason you can trust this at all. This was not a case the church was eager to approve. If anything, the instinct of a careful bishop is to say no, because a false apparition that gets approved does terrible damage to souls. So they tested these girls the way you would test something you fully expected to turn out to be a fraud. Doctors came and examined them in the middle of their ecstasies, and what they found unsettled them. During the visions, the girls were, in medical terms, simply unreachable. Their gaze was fixed upward on a single point in the air, always the same point, all of them staring at the same place, though they were not coordinating with one another. Lights were shown into their eyes and their pupils did not react. They were pricked and tested and showed no response to pain. Their breathing and their pulse shifted in ways that are very hard to fake, and then, at the exact same instant, as if someone had thrown a switch, they would all come out of it together. Some of these ecstasies lasted not minutes but hours, and during the long ones the girls did not tire, did not sag, did not show the exhaustion that a person faking a trance would inevitably show. And then there was the character of the girls themselves, watched over 2 full decades. The church watched to see whether they got rich, whether they grew proud, whether they began performing for the crowds, whether they contradicted themselves or the faith. And they did not. They lived quiet, difficult, humble lives. Some of them suffered a great deal. And that steadiness over 20 years, that refusal to cash in, is one of the strongest signs there is that something real was happening. Understand something else too, because it shows you just how careful the church was. Not everyone who claimed to see the lady at Kibeho was believed. As the site became famous, other young people came forward saying they had visions of their own. And the church investigated them all, and in the end she approved only 3. The first 3, Alphonsine, Natalie, and Marie Claire. The others she quietly set aside, not necessarily condemning them, but declining to declare them authentic. Do you see what that tells you? This was not a stampede of gullible people ready to believe anything. This was the most cautious institution on earth drawing a hard, narrow line, saying, these 3, yes, and about the rest we will not pronounce. That is the opposite of credulity. That is exactly the discernment you would want standing between you and a lie. And in the year 2001, after all of that, the church did something she does only very rarely. She officially declared the apparitions of Kibeho authentic, worthy of belief. It became the only Marian apparition site ever approved by the Catholic Church on the entire continent of Africa. So this is not folklore. This is the real thing, stamped with the Church's most cautious approval. And now I have to tell you what the lady came to say, and then what she showed them. Because the message began gently, like a mother's, and then turned into the most frightening warning of the modern age. Let me show you. Here is the first thing you have to understand. The Lady of Kibeho did not begin with terror. She began the way a mother begins, with tenderness and with a plea. Over the months and years of the apparitions, she spoke to the girls again and again, and her message at its heart was simple and old. The same message heaven keeps sending because we keep refusing it. Pray, she said. Pray without ceasing, and with your whole heart, not just with your lips. Convert. Turn back to God now, while there is still time, because the world is walking a road that leads to ruin. Repent. Love one another. She asked for a deeper devotion, and this part matters enormously for everything that came after. A devotion to her 7 sorrows. Now, many people have never heard of this. The Seven Sorrows of Mary is an ancient devotion in which we meditate on the seven great sufferings of Our Lady's life. From the prophecy that a sword would pierce her heart, to fleeing with her child from a king who wanted him dead, to standing at the foot of the cross watching her son die, to holding his dead body in her arms. 7 swords through a mother's heart. And it is worth naming them slowly, because the Lady of Kibeho did not ask for this devotion by accident, and once you see what these 7 sorrows are, you will understand why she chose it. The first sorrow is the prophecy of Simeon, the day an old man in the temple looked at the mother holding her newborn and told her that a sword would one day pierce her own soul. Imagine being handed that at the very beginning, holding your baby and being told that this child will one day break your heart. The second sorrow is the flight into Egypt, when Mary had to snatch up her infant son in the night and flee as a refugee, because a king had decided to kill him and was slaughtering the children of a whole region to do it. The third sorrow is the loss of the child Jesus in Jerusalem. 3 days of a mother's pure terror, searching, not knowing where her son was. The fourth sorrow is Mary meeting Jesus on the road to Calvary, the two of them locking eyes for a moment as he carried the cross that would kill him, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The fifth sorrow is Mary standing at the foot of the cross, not fainting, not fleeing, but standing, watching her son die slowly over hours. The sixth sorrow is Mary receiving the dead body of Jesus into her arms as he was taken down, the image the whole world knows from 1,000 paintings. And the seventh sorrow is Mary watching her son be laid in the tomb and the stone rolled shut. 7 swords. And notice what they all have in common. Every single one is a sorrow about violence done to the innocent, about a mother watching evil close in on a child she cannot protect. That is not a coincidence. That is precisely the sorrow she was about to ask an entire nation of mothers to share. And the Lady of Kibeho asked, specifically, that people pray this, that they meditate on these sorrows, that they unite themselves to a mother's grief. Why would she ask for that? Hold that question because the answer is coming, and it is devastating. Because a mother who is about to watch her children slaughter one another is asking them in advance to learn how to share her sorrow, so that maybe, just maybe, their hearts would soften before it was too late. But the world, as always, was distracted. Rwanda in the early 1980s was a country with deep, hidden divisions. 2 peoples, 2 ethnic groups, the Hutu and the Tutsi, had lived together for generations, but under the surface ran a long history of resentment, of rivalry, of one group being taught to fear and despise the other. On the surface, life looked normal. Neighbors greeted neighbors, children went to school together, but underneath, a poison was being passed quietly from heart to heart, from generation to generation, the kind of hatred that most people did not take seriously, that seemed like it would never boil over. And into that calm, deceptive surface, the Mother of God came, weeping, and begged them to convert before the fire came. And if that pattern sounds familiar, it should, because it is the pattern of almost every great approved apparition in the history of the Church. Think about it. At La Salette in the mountains of France, she appeared to 2 shepherd children, weeping, warning of famine and chastisement if people did not turn back. At Fatima in Portugal in 1917, she came to 3 shepherd children and warned that if humanity did not convert, a worse war than the one raging would come. And she was right. The Second World War followed. At Akita in Japan, an approved apparition, she wept and warned of fire falling on humanity. Again and again, across centuries and continents, the same figure appears, usually to children, usually the poor and the overlooked, always weeping, always saying the same essential thing: turn back, pray, convert, before it is too late. Kibeho stands in that exact line. It is not a strange one-off. It is the Mother of God doing again in Africa what she has done over and over across the world, coming ahead of a catastrophe to beg her children to change the ending while they still can. And that is what makes the tears at Kibeho so heavy. This was not a new or experimental message. It was the same plea heaven has been making for 200 years, and here it was being made one more time, to one more group of children, over one more nation about to destroy itself. Think about the strangeness of it. Heaven does not usually send the Queen of Peace to a quiet country school in a nation no one was worried about. Heaven sends her ahead of the storm. She came to Kibeho precisely because Kibeho and all of Rwanda was sitting on a volcano that the world could not see, and she came to plead for conversion while there was still time to change the ending. And when the pleading was not enough, when she saw that the warning in words was not breaking through, she did something almost unbearable. She stopped telling them, and she started showing them. On a day in August of 1982, during a public apparition with crowds watching, the faces of the visionaries changed. And what happened next is the second thing I have to prepare you for, because it is one of the most horrifying scenes in the modern history of the faith, and it is the reason grown men who were there never forgot it. The girls began to see, and what they saw, the Mother of God showed them on purpose, was the future of their own country. Let me tell you what they witnessed. Here is the first thing I promised you, and I tell it soberly, not to shock you for the sake of shocking, but because it really happened and it really matters. On that day in August 1982, in front of a crowd, the three girls fell into ecstasy, and the lady opened before their eyes a vision of what was coming. And the girls began to tremble, and then to weep, and then to scream. They saw a river that had turned to blood. They saw people killing other people, mountains of corpses, bodies without their heads, bodies left unburied with no one to bury them. They saw a valley full of dead. They saw trees on fire and open graves and a world drowning in violence and hatred. And it was so real to them, so immediate, that they wept and cried out in horror, some of them collapsing, as if they were watching it happen right in front of them. The people in the crowd could not see the vision, but they could see the girls. And the sight of those children convulsing in terror, sobbing, staring at an horror no one else could see, was something that marked everyone present for the rest of their lives. Think about what that day did to the witnesses. These were not actors. These were girls they knew, children from their own community, and the crowd watched them beg, watched them recoil as if from something rushing toward them, watched them try to look away from a thing that was not in the field but was clearly to them completely real. Some in the crowd fell to their knees. Some wept without knowing why. And when the girls finally came out of it, they could barely speak of what they had seen. They were shaken to the core, drained, some of them ill afterward. They did not describe it with the excitement of someone who had seen a wonder. They described it the way a person describes a nightmare they cannot get out of their head, haltingly, reluctantly, as if saying it out loud made it more real. And here is what should stop you. They were teenagers. They had no framework for what they were being shown. They had never seen a war. They had never seen a massacre. They were girls from a quiet school in a quiet country, and they were being made to watch, in advance, the destruction of everything they knew, and they did not have the words for it because the words for it did not yet exist in their world. The words would only exist 12 years later, when the rest of Rwanda finally saw what the girls had already seen. And in the middle of it, the visionaries said, the Blessed Mother herself was weeping. The Queen of Heaven, crying. Not the tears of comfort. The tears of a mother who sees exactly what is coming for her children and is begging them, with everything she has, to turn back before it arrives. Now the Church, in her caution, has always been careful about how to interpret that vision. She has never claimed it was a simple crystal ball prediction with a date attached. That is exactly the kind of fabrication we must avoid. What the Church says is more sober and somehow more chilling, that the Lady of Kibeho gave an urgent, apocalyptic warning of what unrepented hatred would do to that land, a warning of catastrophe if there was no conversion. She showed them where the road they were on ended, and the road they were on ended in a valley full of blood, and the words that went with it were just as heavy. The lady told them that the world was on the edge of catastrophe, that faith was growing cold, that people had turned away from God and toward hatred, and that if there was no repentance, terrible things would come. She asked them to tell the world what they had seen. She said her message was not only for Rwanda but for everyone, everywhere, because the sickness she was warning about, the hatred, the hardness of heart, the refusal to convert, was not Rwanda's alone. It was the world's, and she wept as she said it, the way only a mother weeps when she can already see the coffin being built for a child who is still alive and still has time to be saved. And before I tell you how it was fulfilled, I want you to sit with the things the lady asked for, because they were not the demands of a spirit trying to frighten people. They were the requests of a mother trying to save them. She asked that people pray, yes, but she also asked for concrete things. She asked that a chapel be built at Kibeho, a place where people could come and pray and remember. She asked for pilgrimages, for the site to become a place of conversion. She spoke about the importance of suffering accepted for love, about penance, about a faith that had grown lukewarm and needed to catch fire again. She warned that people no longer loved God, that the world was rushing toward the edge of an abyss, and that only a return to prayer and a change of heart could pull it back. None of this was strange or heretical. Every word of it lined up perfectly with the gospel, with what the church has always taught. And that, again, is one of the marks of a true apparition. Heaven never contradicts itself. There is even more that the church noted about those apparitions, things that gave the visions their weight. One of the girls, Alphonsine, was said to have been taken on a kind of long, mystical journey, an experience that lasted many hours, in which she was shown realities beyond this world. Another of the visionaries undertook severe fasting and penance at the lady's request, offering her own small sufferings for the conversion of others. A girl barely more than a child taking on the posture of an intercessor for a whole nation. The visions could last for hours. The girls, examined by doctors during the ecstasies, showed no normal responses. They were, in every medical sense, somewhere else. And through it all, the lady kept returning to the same refrain, gentle and urgent at once. Pray, repent, convert, and do it now, while there is still time. Time. She kept using that word, because she could see the clock running out. And here is the part that turns this from a terrifying story into something that should stop your heart. Because 12 years later, the world found out whether it was real. Everything the girls saw, the rivers of blood, the mountains of bodies, the unburied dead, the country drowning in slaughter, came to pass. Not as a symbol, literally. And I have to tell you how, because when you hear it, you will understand why Kibeho is a warning the whole world was meant to hear, and almost no one did. Let me tell you what happened in 1994. Here is the second thing I promised you, and it is the reason the whole world should know the name Kibeho. In the spring of 1994, 12 years after the girls saw that valley of blood, Rwanda exploded. The old hatreds that had been simmering under the surface, the ones the lady had wept over, finally boiled over into one of the fastest and most savage genocides in human history. In the span of about 100 days, neighbors turned on neighbors, and somewhere around 800,000 to 1 million people were slaughtered, many of them hacked to death with machetes, in their homes, in the streets, in the very churches where they had run to hide. 1 million human beings in 100 days. To grasp that speed, understand this. It was faster, per day, than almost any killing in modern history. It was not done from a distance with bombs. It was done up close, by hand, with machetes and clubs, by ordinary people against their own neighbors, people who had lived side by side, shopped in the same markets, prayed in the same churches. The radio urged them on, calling the victims cockroaches, telling people it was their duty to kill. And they did, in numbers and with a cruelty that broke the mind to witness. And here is the second warning inside the first, the one that should shame all of us who live far away and comfortable. The world watched it happen and did almost nothing. The killing was not secret. It was reported. The outside world knew, more or less in real time, that something monstrous was unfolding, and the powerful nations of the earth, for 100 days, largely looked away, calculated that it was not their problem, and let it run its course. By the time the world stirred itself, most of the dead were already dead. So, Kibeho is not only the story of a nation that did not heed a warning from heaven, it is the story of a whole world that did not heed the warning of its own eyes. Twice the alarm was sounded, once by a weeping mother 12 years early, and once by the news itself as the bodies piled up, and both times the answer was mostly silence and turning away. Remember that the next time you are tempted to think that the warnings of God are the only ones we ignore. We ignore the ones right in front of us too. We are very, very good at not seeing what we do not want to see. And the rivers, the actual rivers of Rwanda, ran with bodies. So many bodies that they clogged the waterways and were carried downstream, some of them all the way to the Great Lakes and beyond. People who saw it described exactly what the girls had described 12 years before, without ever having heard of Kibeho. Rivers of the dead, valleys of corpses with no one left to bury them. The vision the girls had screamed and wept over 12 years earlier, the rivers of blood, the mountains of unburied corpses, the country drowning in slaughter, was not a symbol anymore. It was the evening news. It happened, exactly, horribly, literally. And here is the detail that will stay with you. Kibeho itself, the very hillside where the Mother of God had wept and warned, became one of the sites of the massacre. Thousands of people who fled to the church there seeking sanctuary were killed. The place of the warning became a place of the slaughter it had warned about. And I want to be careful here because this is where cheap videos would sensationalize, and I will not do that with real dead. What happened in Rwanda was not caused by an apparition, and it was not the will of God. It was caused by human choices, by years of hatred cultivated and excused, by leaders who fed a poison to ordinary people until ordinary people picked up blades against their neighbors. The apparition did not make it happen. The apparition warned against it. That is the whole point, and it is the exact opposite of superstition. Heaven saw where a nation's hatred was heading and sent a mother to weep and to beg them to change course. And the tragedy is not that the warning was mysterious. The tragedy is that it was clear and it was not heeded. And here is what makes the hair stand up on your arms. In the years after the genocide, as the survivors tried to make sense of the abyss they had lived through, people who remembered Kibeho, people who had been children in those crowds in 1982, or who had heard the accounts, began to realize that they had been shown this. The rivers choked with the dead, the bodies with no one to bury them, the valley of corpses. It was not a vague match. It was the thing itself. Missionaries and survivors who documented the genocide wrote that the images the visionaries had described 12 years earlier read like eyewitness testimony of 1994, except that they had been spoken before it happened, and written down, and kept. The warning had been sitting in the church's own records the entire time, waiting like a sealed letter that no one wanted to open, until the day the events tore it open for everyone to read. And one more thing, the most sobering of all. Do you remember Marie Claire, the visionary who had once been a mocker, a doubter, before the lady came even to her? Marie Claire herself was killed in the genocide. One of the very girls to whom the Mother of God had shown the vision of blood died in the fulfillment of it. And I want you to notice why this cannot be waved away as a lucky guess. Skeptics will say, well, it was a poor, unstable country. Anyone could have predicted trouble. But look at what was actually foretold. Not vague trouble, not hard times. A specific apocalyptic image. Rivers turned to blood, mountains of unburied bodies, people slaughtering their own neighbors, a valley of the dead. Given 12 years in advance in the exact country where it would occur, to poor schoolgirls who had no way of knowing the future, and preserved in church records the whole time, long before anyone dreamed of what was coming. And then it happened. Not approximately, but with a precision that made the survivors who knew of Kibeho go cold. That is not a coincidence you can shrug off. That is heaven putting its warning on the record in advance, so that afterward no one could say they had not been told. Now sit with what this means because it is almost too heavy. 12 years before it happened, heaven sent the Mother of God to a poor school in the exact country where it would happen, and she wept, and she showed them the future, and she begged over and over for the one thing that could change the ending: conversion, prayer, a turning of hearts away from hatred. She told them the disease and she gave them the medicine, 12 years in advance, and it was not enough. Not because heaven failed, but because the warning, as warnings so often are, was not heeded in time. The world did not listen, and 1 million people died. I do not tell you this to horrify you. I tell you because a warning that came true is a warning we cannot afford to treat as a story about someone else, far away, long ago. Because the Lady of Kibeho did not only come for Rwanda. Everything she showed there, she showed as a warning to the whole world. And that is the third thing, the part that is really about you. Let me bring it home. So let me bring this home because I did not tell you the story of Kibeho to frighten you about Africa in the 1990s. I told you because the Mother of God, when she wept on that hillside, was weeping over something that did not stay in Rwanda, something that lives in every human heart, including yours and mine. Because where does a genocide actually come from? It does not begin with machetes. It begins always with something much smaller and much closer to home. It begins with a hatred that is allowed to live, with a grudge that is fed instead of forgiven, with the habit of seeing another group of people, another family, another tribe, another person, as less than human, as the enemy, as them. The million deaths in Rwanda began years before, as a poison in ordinary hearts, a hatred that people told themselves was normal, was justified, was no big deal. And that is exactly what the Lady of Kibeho came to stop. She was not really warning about a political event. She was warning about what unforgiven hatred does when you let it grow. She was showing, in the most terrible way possible, the end of a road that every single one of us has, at some point, set our foot upon. And that is why her warning is not expired and not far away. It is for you, tonight. Because you have a Rwanda inside you too. You have the resentment you will not let go of, the family member you have written off, the person you have decided to hate and told yourself you have good reasons, the tribe, the party, the group you have allowed yourself to see as less than human. Every one of those is a drop of the same poison that once filled a river with blood. It never looks like much at the start. It never does. Nobody who fed a small hatred ever thought it would end in a valley of corpses. But the Mother of God came to Kibeho precisely to tell us that the small hatred and the river of blood are the same thing, only 12 years apart. And she came with the cure, the same cure she always brings, the one the world keeps thinking is too simple to matter. Pray. Convert now, today, not later. Forgive the one you have not forgiven. Root out the hatred while it is still small, while it is still just a feeling in your chest and not yet a machete in your hand. Take up her 7 sorrows, and let a mother teach you to feel sorrow for sin instead of pleasure in resentment. That is not a small thing. That is how you stop a genocide, one heart at a time, starting with your own. And I know how that sounds because forgiveness has become a soft greeting card word, and I am not talking about a feeling. I am not asking you to suddenly feel warm toward the person who hurt you. Forgiveness is not a feeling. It is a decision, a hard one, made in the will, often through gritted teeth, and made again the next morning when the resentment comes back, and again the morning after that. It is a discipline, like prayer, like fasting. You decide to stop feeding the grudge. You decide to stop rehearsing the offense in your mind, playing it over and over, because every time you play it, you water the seed. You decide to pray for the person you would rather curse, and you do it whether you feel like it or not, and you keep doing it until one day, maybe years later, you notice the poison is gone. That is the work. And it is the most important work you will ever do, because look at what is loose in the world right now. Look at how easily whole populations are being taught, again, to see other people as less than human, to sort the world into us and them, to treat contempt as a virtue and cruelty as strength. It is happening in nations at war. It is happening in societies at peace, online, in the way we talk about the people we disagree with. The same machinery that filled a river in Rwanda is running quietly in 1,000 places, and most of the people feeding it have no idea what road they are on, exactly as the people of Rwanda had no idea in 1982. And into all of it, the Lady of Kibeho still speaks the only words that have ever pulled a human being back from that abyss. Pray, convert, forgive, love, and do it now. Because here is the mercy hidden inside this terrifying story. The Lady of Kibeho did not only come to warn, she came because it was not too late. She would not have wept and pleaded for conversion if conversion could not change anything. Warnings are acts of love. You do not warn someone you have given up on. The very fact that heaven sent the Queen of Heaven to weep on a hillside means that heaven had not stopped hoping that hearts could still turn. And that hope is held out to you tonight, over whatever river of blood is beginning, small and hidden, in your own life. It is not too late for you, and if you doubt that grace can really undo hatred, look at what happened afterward in Rwanda itself, because that is the part of the story the world almost never tells. After the horror, that same country became the site of some of the most astonishing acts of forgiveness in modern history. Survivors sat down, face to face, with the very people who had murdered their families. Killers confessed and wept and begged forgiveness, and, in ways that break the mind almost as much as the genocide did, were forgiven. Villages where neighbors had slaughtered neighbors slowly, painfully, began to live side by side again. And Kibeho, the very hillside where the mother had wept and where thousands later died, was not abandoned. It became a shrine, an approved place of pilgrimage, where today people come from all over the world to pray, to grieve, and to be reconciled. The place of the warning and the place of the slaughter became, in the end, a place of healing. That is what the mercy of God can do even with the worst thing human beings are capable of. And if forgiveness like that is possible there, in the shadow of a million graves, then whatever grudge you are carrying tonight is not too big for it either. Yours is not the hardest case heaven has ever handled, not even close. So, do the thing she asked. Pray, forgive, convert. Pull the poison out now, while it is small. Pray for the peace of a world that is, right now, in many places, walking the same road Rwanda walked. And ask Our Lady of Kibeho, the weeping mother who told the truth when no one wanted to hear it, to pierce your heart with her sorrow, so that it never has to be pierced by the consequences of a hatred you refuse to let go. Pray for the souls of the million who died. Pray for your own heart. And do not wait 12 years. I love you, family, and I will see you in the next one.